Okay, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a good lunch. I had a chance to chat with some people. My name is Jim Delaney. I work for World University Service of Canada, and I have the pleasure of being the host for today. That means that my job is to sit here behind the desk, to ask a couple of questions, and otherwise to listen intently to our panelists. I hope that today will be a conversation. We've got four amazing panelists who have some thoughts to share, but I hope that we can open that up to the audience and to share questions, ideas, concerns. This is a small enough group, and we have enough time to have a great chit chat. So the topic of this panel is focused on youth and international development. I think that it's a really relevant topic for this particular community and this particular group. This is a group of development professionals. We all work in a certain segment of development. Most of us manage aid projects of one form or another. And it's been mentioned by a couple of people that that I might even be on the lower end of the age register in the conference. And I think that we have seen that the community is aging. And a lot of people that, and I would count myself amongst them, that 30 years ago might have been precocious youngsters getting started in the business, have more gray hairs and a few battle scars. So we thought we would host this discussion to look at the development industry, to look at development practice from the perspective of a young professional, to learn about what young people entering the field feel about the field as a whole, both in terms of how they fit into the field, their own career prospects, their own career progression, but also how they feel the field of development practice may grow and change over the next decade. And so we have a great group of people to speak to. But first, once again, being the non-youth member of the panel, I thought I would start by talking about me, because that's what everybody wants to hear about. But I did have a couple of thoughts to frame it up, because I think many of us started in development around, a lot of us started maybe in the 1980s, 1990s. I started in the early 1990s. And I think that entering the field was very, very different than it is now. I remember starting university, I barely understood that the world existed outside of Nova Scotia. I had been to Quebec once, and it was very, very strange. The first time that I got on a plane was to go to Jamaica with Canada World Youth. And I think at the time, these volunteer programs were one of the ways that a lot of people entered the field. And learning about cross-cultural relations, learning about the world was a really important part of that time. I think that many of us didn't think a lot about what development meant as a profession at the time. There were very few programs to train development professionals, and the profession itself wasn't as structured as it was today. And you can see that by the bios of the young people that we have in front of them, that what they've managed to accomplish in terms of education qualifications, in terms of early internships, in terms of early stage professional development, is very different from what many of us that started 20 or 30 years ago. It also has to go without saying that for many of us that got into the sector in Canada, we were of a certain ethnicity and a certain background, and that the sector's changed. And so these are the kinds of questions that we'd like to talk through. What stayed the same, what's changed, and how that matters to young people that are entering the profession. So with that said, my job is to introduce these people, and I have to read their bios because they're very, very long. I mentioned to them all that if I were to read my bio at the age of 25, it would have said Jim Delaney really likes to drink beer. And that there's a little bit more behind this. So we're going to start, I'm not doing it in order here. We're going to start with Valentina Canales-Burke. Valentina is a graduate student here at NPSIA. She specializes in international organizations and global policy and Latin American and Caribbean studies. And she holds a position as a researcher at Nexus Consulting. I'm really sorry about that, by the way. I'm like, and where she works on various domestic and international research projects. Some of her research themes include gender and conservation in Latin America, youth policy in Tunisia, and development coordination programs across the Ivory Coast. She's previously held positions with the Treasury Board of Canada and with the internal audit and with Carleton University in public relations. She's deeply committed to advocating for the inclusion and empowerment of youth in international development. So welcome, Valentina.
Thank you.
We also have Ali Kaveri. Ali is the manager of youth-led partnerships with Digital Opportunity Trust, a great nonprofit, and really one of Canada's best kept secrets when it comes to youth development. He previously served a number of different nonprofit organizations, including the Youth Equality Center, which he founded after his university studies in Uganda. The Uganda Youth Network and the Forum for Women in Democracy are also organizations that he served. He served on a number of boards and is an alumnus of the Mandela Institute for Development Studies in South Africa, a Women Deliver Young Leader, and he is among the 2017 120 under 40 winners under the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health. I'm not even going to read the rest. But we can learn more about everybody later. Then we have Emmett Mark right beside me. Emmett Mark is executive assistant to the CEO. We all know that means the actual boss. And a project assistant at the Parliamentary Centre. In this role, Emmett supports the president, CEO, and acts as an assistant for various external relations projects such as Engage Parle Diplo. Through the president, CEO, he is also coordinator of the Centre's board of directors, as well as partnerships, outreach, communications, including the outstanding team of Centre associates. Emmett is born and raised in Vancouver and holds a BA in International Relations from UBC and is in the final stages, while working full-time, of completing a Master's of Arts at Carleton University. Is your supervisor here by chance?
No, thankfully not. Otherwise, I think he'd chase after me.
Okay. And has an upcoming career change that he can talk a little bit about when he speaks to himself. And finally, another year. And finally, we have Ganyat Sadiq. Ganyat is an advocate passionate about eliminating systemic barriers marginalized communities face. These interests are reflective of the, I'm too old to be able to say things like that, ampersand I am X movement, a social community founded by Ganyat that seeks to raise awareness of the injustices faced by Black, Indigenous, and racialized individuals, and to provide a safe space to share their experiences. She's also co-founded and serves as the co-executive officer external of the Black Inclusion Association, a novel nonprofit that aims to achieve equity and social justice for Black Albertans. Ganyat holds a BA honors in political science and a BA in international relations with a certificate in pluralism and global citizenship from the University of Calgary. She's currently pursuing her master's in international affairs here at NPSIA with a specialization in international development policy with a collaborative program in African studies. In February 2023, Ganyat was selected as a Prime Minister's Youth Council member. This is really amazing to have you all here. So we're going to start asking you each to flesh out your bios a little bit more. And I'm really looking forward to having a chat over the next 90 minutes. I think that what I'm excited about is not to speak to you simply as young professionals in development, but also as professionals in development. I think that you have a lot to share and a lot that we can learn from. So let's start with Valentina. What brought you where you are today? And could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Valentina Canales-Burke, and it is an honor to be here at a conference with a ton of international development professionals because I did my undergrad in international development at the University of Ottawa, which is really where my passion, I guess, for international development started. I'm now a graduate student at NPSIA, and like Jim mentioned, I'm doing a specialization in Latin American studies. And this specialization is really near and dear to my heart because I was born and raised in Mexico, and I moved here with my family about 10 years ago. We picked a really cold region to move to. In addition to being a professional student, as some might call me, I'm also a researcher for Nexus, which you said unfortunately. Hi, Michael. No, I'm kidding. It's great. I love it. And through Nexus Cooperation, I've had the opportunity of working on a ton of files from Latin America to Europe and Africa on a ton of extremely interesting topics, ranging from gender, human rights, and youth engagement in politics. And I think that the latter is really applicable to our session today. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you. I'm excited to hear what my fellow panelists have to say.
Thanks, Valentina. And Ali, what can you tell us about yourself?
First and foremost, I must count myself very lucky, actually, to be, sharing this stage with my colleagues here, but also being in this space. I would say I've been in Canada I'm actually making 2 years this coming April. But just to give you a little bit about myself, originally I was raised in rural Uganda, eastern part of Uganda. By my grandmother. My mom actually gave birth to me when she was still in college, so she couldn't take care of me. So she had to hand over me to my grandmother. So all I can speak to about, I would say that before coming here, like you heard Jim say, I was actually leading a nonprofit organization, one of the most vibrant youth organizations that was actually advocating for issues around gender equality, social justice, and youth participation, especially in governance and development processes generally, until 2021, when the government of Uganda actually seized our operations, and along other 54 organizations that were told to close. Reason being that we aren't government, but for us for majorly doing our work in terms of serving our communities. But before that, I had an opportunity to also work with the Digital Opportunity Trust that sort of mentored me, especially that prepared me for where I am today, because immediately after university, I had the opportunity of going through the Digital Opportunity Trust internship program that sort of gave young people an opportunity to sort of, to practice, what they've actually studied, but also to sort of bridge between the world of work and employment by giving me an internship sort of opportunity to kind of, build on my experience. So in short, I would actually say that that's who I am, and that's how I find myself in Canada. And I'm really happy to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to actually sharing my thoughts with the team, with everyone here.
Thanks, Ali. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Emmett.
Hi, well, as Jim alluded earlier, I'm actually transitioning to a new role as of Monday, so this conference couldn't have come at a better time. I'll be joining Dignity Network Canada this coming Monday, so if there are any gender or sexuality diversity specialists or experts in the audience, would love to connect after this panel. I'd kind of have to say that my sort of journey into international development almost came kind of accidentally. I kind of fell backwards into it. I relocated to Ottawa from Vancouver in summer 2021, actually to work on Parliament Hill as a parliamentary staffer to an MP. The 2021 election happened. My boss promptly lost his seat. I thought, okay, well, that's probably a sign for the universe telling me something. I kind of went full-time into graduate studies, and during my last semester of coursework here at Carleton University, I was able to kind of bridge into this very interesting opportunity called Engage Parl Diplo. This is kind of one of the external outreach programs run by my current employer at the Parliamentary Centre. It was previously called the Carleton Initiative for Parliamentary and Diplomatic Engagement, and part of the Memorandum of Understanding between those two organizations is that the Parliamentary Centre is required to hire part-time program associates to support some of that external outreach programming. And really, I think I count myself really lucky and really fortunate to be in some of these spaces, able to work with very, very interesting and very exciting and diverse parliamentary, diplomatic offices, various sort of stakeholders in outreach, and definitely by virtue of the position I am currently in and currently will be going into, look forward definitely to expanding on that sort of roster, that Rolodex of contacts, and get to really get a good grasp of the industry at large.
That's great. Thanks, Emmett. And Ganyet.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you all. So a little bit of my story is I'm Nigerian, so I moved here when I was 6 years old, and I think international development is something I've always been passionate about based on that. But I actually got involved in the space of like youth advocacy and youth engagement in international affairs. Following the Christchurch mosque attack that happened in New Zealand, and then seeing the impacts of Islamophobia here in Canada. So that was like my first time kind of investigating global relations and things like that, leading me to found the IMX movement, as well as, the world kind of watched the murder of George Floyd as well too. So we also saw the unique intersection for me of, also being Black and Muslim, and what does that mean? So I started doing a lot of work of like youth engagement and youth advocacy. So that was all simultaneously happening while I was studying political science and international relations at the University of Calgary. So my academic interests kind of meshed a little bit with my advocacy interests. So I'm Nigerian, really into Africa and the development of Africa, specifically how foreign aid impacts the development of Africa. So I did my undergraduate research thesis on, the corruption implications of foreign aid, and if foreign aid is actually as successful as we think it is, and effective ways that we can try and make sure it's better and actually helping the countries that we want it to help. And that led me to do my master's here today. So now I'm doing my master's in international affairs at Carleton. And then this week actually marks 1 year into my mandate of being selected as the Prime Minister's Youth Council member, where we do get to speak with the Prime Minister and other ministerial cabinet members and MPs on, things we're passionate about as youth. So my mandate focuses specifically on international development, our global relations, and how Canada can kind of better position itself as a global leader.
That's great, and congratulations on the mandate. I'm sure that you're an important part of the council.
Tell them about the ODA.
I think so. So we've got a few questions. I'm going to start with one about opportunities, but I think that what we might try to do in this panel is, instead of give 4 or 5 questions and then take questions and comments from the audience, we might stop a couple of times through to see if people have things to interject or to add. So let me start with a question about opportunities for young professionals. And I guess the short form of the question, and I'll start with Valentina, is, are there enough opportunities available for young people that want to enter the profession? And if so, what do they look like, or what could they look like?
Sure, thanks for the question. In order to prepare for this question, I actually had the opportunity to chat with a couple of different students in international affairs and international development all over the world. I'm very grateful that I have a broad network all over. And I got a mixed bag of answers, but of course their answer is yes and no. There are opportunities, but not exactly one or the other. I would say that the opportunities that are out there that are extremely accessible to students are really Band-Aid solutions. So, the ability to go work and volunteer abroad, which might benefit a student more for themselves rather than for, the greater good of a community. So I think that a lot of these opportunities are there, but they're not extremely in depth. And a lot of the things that we learn in academia, like these theories and practicality, they don't really apply in the workplaces, which I think impacts, these opportunities. Another thing is, I think that where you're located really plays a role on these opportunities. We're currently in Ottawa, in the capital. Driving into campus this morning, I saw 3 diplomatic vehicles with their red license plates. So it's really easy to say that here in Ottawa, especially as Norman Patterson students, the opportunities are there and they're really easily accessible, but it might not be the same reality for somebody who is in BC or somebody who's in Manitoba. So I think that definitely plays a role. And I think that opportunities are increasing in the workplace. However, because we are seeing a generational shift, you mentioned it yourself, I think that there's professionals exiting the field and there are opportunities there for young people to take advantage of them. But there has to be mentorship programs in place in order for youth to really take advantage of these opportunities and excel at them. So, and having programs like the co-op program here at Carleton or at the University of Ottawa is extremely helpful for that.
That's great. Thanks, Valentina. And Ali, if we could follow up, you've had a fairly distinct career in that you started overseas in Uganda at home, and then you moved to Canada.
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities were you able to take advantage of, and what opportunities do you wish you could have that weren't there?
I think, thank you so much. Actually, I was afraid that you're going to ask the same question, actually. So basically, and I really want to sort of bring the lens, and of course I can't really authoritatively speak, especially what's happening in Canada. But of course, what I know that most, especially youth issues that, it's a global sort of conversation. But of course, what really what's different is maybe the context. And maybe I'll just speak majorly to, especially to the African context, but also where I've actually lived. I would say that whereas there may be opportunities for engagement, but you find that most times these opportunities are sort of dominated by, older folks. You find that spaces for engagement sometimes is tokenistic in nature. You find that most times, and when I say about tokenism, you find that, we are either given transport refunds or given small tokens, for us to be able to engage in this sort of, spaces. You find that sometimes also youth are not sort of engaged through consultations. You find that most programs that especially target young people are kind of, predetermined by those in authority, and they call on you to sort of, engage. And that's why, especially in my line of work and throughout my career, and going right from the grassroots, the aspect of, working with young people as co-designers into, shaping the kind of programs that young people can actually, that do benefit young people is very, very critical. When you look at some of the programs, like for example, in my docket of work right now, we are trying to sort of, see what are the best mechanisms of creating opportunities for youth engagement, especially in development sort of arena. Can we sit at the round table with them? Can we sort of hear what the youth have to say? And that's why we have different sessions around, working together, co-designing, refining these ideas, saying that, this is how we need to sort of work together, other than, superimposing these ideas onto young people. And maybe what I can also say lastly, as I wind up, is that whereas also opportunities may be there, but when it comes again to the policy sort of frameworks, still these are largely controlled by, those in authority. And most times when they see vibrant, youth come up, they sort of have this mindset that, these youth are going to take over, they're going to take over our jobs, our opportunities. And it's not even actually surprising, like for a vibrant organization like my organization. Of course, there was negotiation for reopening, but you see that an organization that is existing to serve young people, that is actually closed. Yeah, that space is sort of closed without actually thinking about the bigger picture. So I would say that opportunities could be there, but again, in terms of if there are opportunities for meaningful, actually the word is meaningful engagement, rather than more of like tokenistic sort of engagement.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that we're those of us that are not young are often guilty of consulting in ways that are quite thin and quite narrow. Emmett, do you have anything to add in regards to what kind of opportunities are available to be engaged?
Yeah, well, I think to really put it in a nutshell, there just aren't a lot, and there aren't many. As I was kind of alluding to earlier, right? Like myself, I don't know about the rest of our panelists, but I kind of stumbled into this industry completely almost by accident. If you were talking to me around this time last year, January, I probably wouldn't have said that I would be sitting on a panel speaking about kind of building a career in international development. And I'd say even the initial contract I got was sort of a part-time opportunity that lasted from February to April to kind of match the school semester. And then I was actually very, very close to becoming an oil and gas lobbyist. So imagine so I guess it's great that I stayed in this industry here, but imagine what the sort of multiverse of pathways would be. Because I think due to kind of my strong performance and it was being a good fit and my prior experience working on Parliament Hill, kind of in my day-to-day, in my current position, I am working closely with various sort of parliamentary diplomatic stakeholders. It was kind of a natural extension of what I was already kind of doing, and that kind of was built into the full-time role that the Parliamentary Center itself actually had to create for me. So kind of thinking kind of how it was kind of accident upon accident, kind of stumbling backwards for me to get into this position. I can't really imagine what somebody that didn't have that sort of that lucky break to kind of squeeze in to kind of this sort of NGO space where we do kind of are based on managing projects. I know we'll probably be discussing that, kind of some of the qualifications required to be successful at this stage in our careers, probably later. But I'd say broadly that maybe my perception is a bit skewed because we are in Ottawa, we are in a government town, but looking kind of at my circle of peers or the people that I know professionally, I'd say the ones that are working in this nonprofit NGO international development space, I could probably count on one hand. The majority of which, especially the professional programs here at Carleton, they tend to be more so feeders into the civil service, or I have a lot of friends that are still working kind of in the political space or the GR lobbying type space, or we see people that go kind of directly into kind of the private sector. We really, this sort of third space of being in this nonprofit NGO, it's really not a reality that a lot of people in my age cohort, I think, are thinking of pursuing or even know how to kind of squeeze in there and get in there.
That's interesting. And I'd like to come back to that a little bit later of the sort of why aren't people considering it. So if you all could keep that in the back of your minds, well, we'll come back. And Ganyet, how about yourself? What's your reflection on opportunities for young people?
I think it's a mixed bag. I do think that there are opportunities for young people, but I think there are a lot of barriers in achieving that. So I'm someone that very much am only in the space that I'm in because other people open the door for me, but that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people. So I only know about the Prime Minister's Youth Council because there was specifically someone that told me this is how you should apply, this is when you should apply, this is what to write on your application, that kind of stuff, and really mentored me throughout the process. And I think the first barrier for sure for youth is that these spaces are very gatekept. So we find ourselves talking to the same people. And I'm saying this as someone who was once outside looking in and now is a beneficiary of the fact that it's such a gatekept sphere. So once you do get your foot in the door, you find that it's kind of shut right behind you. And I say this also as a Nigerian Canadian who specializes in trying to, pursue development initiatives for Nigerians. And I realized that myself, who hasn't lived in Nigeria for a long time, and then there's Nigerian immigrants that are just moving to Canada, they have a much richer perspective on how development initiatives in Nigeria should actually look like. So I think that's a huge gap in the sector of not really engaging the diaspora here in Canada, especially youth. We have a lot of young international perspectives that I think should be welcome to the table, and that's something that's not currently being done. And I think also in this conference, we're defining youth as 15 to 29-year-olds. That is a huge age range. As someone who's been in the youth sphere since I was 17 years old, I think it's very interesting that we're still, similar to what Ali was saying, kind of tokenizing youth voices, still trying to pay them the same. I'm sure my financial capabilities when I was 17 are much different to now, and I think the sphere hasn't realized that shift yet of trying to pay youth as they are progressing through their early careers, of realizing that they are getting skills with each position, with each internship, and they should be paid fairly and accommodated for that, because I think it's a bit of a strange role to be paying a 15-year-old and a 29-year-old the same amount when you have very different skill sets to the table and things like that. So there are lots of youth initiative, and I think youth are willing to engage, but there is that barrier of okay, there's this amazing opportunity, how do I actually apply, what do I actually say, these things. Nobody's willing to kind of do that mentorship for people, and it is definitely, I think, all of us, even as youth that are in this space, have to make sure that we're opening the door for people behind us as well.
That's very helpful. And I think what I've heard from all of you is a focus on the fact that there are opportunities, but they're opaque, right? They're sometimes hard to learn about. They're hard to enter. That those of us that have connections, that those of us that are lucky can access them, but there's not an equal playing field for young people that are trying to come in. I think let's throw things out to the audience before we pivot to another question. Any questions or reflections from the audience? Yes, Dave.
Jim, like you, Canada World Youth was kind of my launch into the field of development and development world and so forth before your time, actually, when I was really but there are a number of programs out there, and funding for them has been decreasing, and one of them actually closed last year. So when we talked about Canada World Youth, was actually closed after 50 years. last year, probably through a combination of lack of funding and the pandemic probably just killed the travel abroad concept for a lot of people. Second, there's the youth internship program through the Global Affairs Canada, which I don't know how many young people that touches, but it's not significant in terms of numbers. And then there are the programs of internships abroad from the various colleges and universities. And how many that touches, I'm not sure. But there are statistics I haven't seen recently that Canadian students in general are much less inclined to do international internships abroad, especially outside of the Western world. Okay? Very few will go to any place in Africa or from the developing countries of Asia or Latin America to do their internships. They want to go to France and Britain and so forth. So, in terms of the impact on development, okay, and the numbers of opportunities available, it's probably fairly small compared to the overall capacity or what we think should happen. So I just wanted to give some reflection on that and after the panel. There may be other opportunities. There's organizations like International
Crossroads.
Crossroads. Again, a small organization sending young people, Canadians abroad, small periods of time. Then there are the volunteer sending programs that are run by CUSO, WUS, Oxfam, Quebec, etc. But the average age of the volunteers has gone up significantly over the past 20 years on those programs, where it might have been, say, 27 years old. Average age 20 years ago is probably about 39 or 40 years old now for the average age of a cooperative volunteer. So things have shifted in terms of opportunities. And one last comment I would make is, I think it's important that we get more and more youth involved in international development early, because they then become ambassadors for the whole idea of international cooperation, peace, security, people getting together, etc.
That's interesting, thanks. If I could actually ask for a quick reflection from the panel, if any of you have a quick reaction to that.
Yeah, well, to get us started, I think it is very interesting that you mentioned about these abroad opportunities. I think, and then this maybe just is just broadly reflective in Canadian society and what we as young people can achieve. Is it really feasible to expect that somebody that's student age, who knows what the sort of financial resources or family support they might have, to go on kind of a mission trip to a part of the global south, maybe receive a $2,000, $3,000 stipend, and that's supposed to kind of have you survive for the 4 to 8 months that you're there, when really that same person can sign up to be, I don't know, a Gap sales associate and make minimum wage, but they're still making ultimately more money, right? If that's kind of the basic sort of needs that you need to be meeting, I think the choice when young people have to be making those decisions, that's what it's kind of there. Also, reflecting maybe earlier this month, though, we're all aware that Cooperation Canada is making that big push towards kind of the higher levels of government. They released that letter saying that we need more funding. This industry it's not really sustainable, some of the projects and the programs and the funding resources and streams that are existing. And I think the challenges faced by all ages within the international development space are most likely acutely felt by young people or young professionals and recent grads trying to enter this market, right? Like I've seen it myself. We're seeing project officers and program officers at junior officer type levels needing to have up to 10, 15 years experience. Well, when you're a young person who's like a fresh grad, how are you supposed to compete with them to get into those entry level and junior level jobs unless you kind of have kind of an in to that? And the second sort of part that I wanted to touch on was there are certainly a lot of internships. There's a lot of entry level positions which are volunteer or you might be paid a small stipend. I think the challenge is that we do see young people entering and taking advantage of those opportunities, but that's more so almost like a rest stop on their way to working for global affairs or in the private sector or some other organization which does not fall under this international development umbrella. It's trying to find those sort of, and again, like as reflecting on my own experience, being it almost accidental that I kind of landed into a full-time career building with a sort of career path ahead of me in international development. Those sort of pathways, I'm not sure are exactly there or are well defined for young people wanting to enter the fields.
Thanks, Evan.
Yep.
Question back here.
Hi, this is super interesting. It's very much so far focused on Canadian people living in Canada, youth that are here in Canada trying to access opportunities in the field of international development. I would love to hear from the panelists, particularly those who your roots, your upbringing is elsewhere. These barriers that you've described for Canadians, those that are lucky or privileged or have access, how does that make you feel about our priority around empowering youth in your home countries, elsewhere in Africa and Asia? And if you guys feel these barriers, how do we create more opportunities for youth? I mean, they don't look at the sector as international development. When you're a young person, I'm sure in Uganda or Nigeria or Mexico, you're not seeing, oh, I'm a young person, I want to get into international development. I just want to have a livelihood that's meaningful, that pays the bills, that allows me to support my family and progress professionally. How can we create opportunities not only here in Canada, but also for youth in some of these countries, so that they don't face the same barriers? And I'm sure those barriers are 10 times, 20 times, 100 times more difficult than those that you guys are facing today sitting in Canada. So I guess I would love to understand this from the other side of things. You mentioned the diaspora, which I think you're starting to unpack and get into. How do we actually make this more about not just youth that are in programs for international development, but youth more broadly?
Yeah.
Anybody want to take that?
Actually, I was actually burning when you were speaking, and I think David also mentioned something that actually fits exactly into what I'm actually asking. And I think, like here in Canada, I think if you interact with the youth in Canada, they speak from a very privileged sort of point, much as actually could be, opportunities that you've actually described. Because, like for example, where we come from, actually some of these opportunities are non-existent. For some individuals that have actually really had the opportunity, and that's why I started with my opening statement, I count myself being lucky, even to be in this space. You may find that even the existing sort of opportunities that could be there for Canadian youth to sort of also maybe travel like you are actually describing, David, the reverse is not true when it comes to the other side of the aisle. How many youth in Africa, even with the existing sort of programs that happen, sometimes are very, very minimal, that you have, young professionals from the African continent come, to developed countries. First of all, the processes of even coming here is actually like, it's very, very hard to even get a visa, for example, to even migrate this way. And that's why I think maybe to just answer your question, and I'll try to attempt to answer your question, I think the aspect of creating programs for youth within those spaces, like in Africa, is very, very critical. When actually I was trying to describe my situation, and I think for me I was introduced to international development or community sort of organizing at a very young age, at the age of 19, through sort of mentorship by an organization. But again, I was so lucky when I was actually finalizing my university. That's when I actually joined DOT through the internship, 1-year internship program. Very few young people actually get such opportunities to go through those mentorship sort of programs, that you're prepared, in that sort of career direction. So in a nutshell, what I can say is I think there could be opportunities, but how we do it to sort of benefit those groups is actually what's really important. But we could actually start, by, creating those avenues for, creating that sort of change within those spaces.
And yeah, just to add, very similar to what Ali was saying, I think a lot of youth are talking a lot more about positionality. So I know, when we're talking about, well, we need to try and send Canadians abroad, I think that's a very privileged point of view to come from, of like, we'll send Canadians to go try and, figure out the development issues in sub-Saharan Africa and all these other places too. So I think recently I was talking with one of my friends, and we were talking about the fact that, the language requirements for working in international development are pretty much just English and French. And, a majority of Africa does not speak French. So where is, within the international development field, for example, where is that appreciation for African languages, for Canadians here? Why, are we utilizing, the diaspora here in Canada and making sure that if you see someone that's has all these alternative languages that they can contribute to these conversations is definitely something to bring to the table. And I think also in terms of empowering youth that are over there, I think we have to kind of shift the perspective of they need us in a way. So I think very much, like Ali was saying, like there are youth that are getting involved in Nigeria. I was talking to one of my friends in Nigeria, and she was like talking about how the fact that there wasn't a school in her district, so she just created a school because that's just something youth can wake up one day and decide that they want to do, because youth have energy and youth are very, very passionate. So I think if it's like a transference of, rather than like us as the resource, what are skills that we can share? What are, programs that we can put in place that are already existing? There are youth in these places that are already willing to do this work. And like you alluded to, it's not international development for them. It's just trying to get an education. It's trying to sustain their livelihoods. So we've kind of created a whole field about people just trying to live their lives as well too. So I think definitely having that shift within the international development sphere of that savior-ish complex a little bit is definitely something that needs to happen.
That's great. Anything to add, Valentina?
Yeah, I guess first I'll just start by addressing David's point. I think that what you mentioned about, there's less opportunities or less students are going abroad, I definitely see that as well. And I think that COVID honestly played a really big role in this. And now we're starting to see more travel and more students that are choosing to go abroad, I know. But then there's the financial struggles that Emmett mentioned. I know I myself got approved to go on exchange in the fall, but now I have to think about, would I rather go on exchange, or would I rather, stay back and make money? And living in Canada, the cost of living in Canada is extremely expensive, not to mention now the cost of living in other countries.
Can I make just one little prompt on that?
Yeah.
So in Europe, approximately 12% of students go abroad to do internships. In Canada, it's less than 4%.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of they
like,
choose.
would that be abroad within the European Union, or like abroad to the global south, or outside of Europe? Yeah.
But anyways, that's all really what I wanted to touch on your question, on your comment. And now in terms of barriers and prioritizing empowering youth, I think that one thing that could happen is there could be more collaboration across universities all over the world. I mean, there are exchange programs out there, but going on exchange is expensive. And then if you're an international student, and say in my undergrad, I met a lot of international students at the University of Ottawa. And one of the best features of my undergrad at the University of Ottawa was the co-op program. Every single international student I spoke with had a really, really difficult time finding a job through the co-op program, if they could even find a job in the first place. And that's obviously due to Canadian paperwork and just the fact that the government wants to prioritize Canadian citizenship, which I do understand. But then when we look at other opportunities, such as virtual opportunities, which are becoming increasingly available, also because of COVID, they're fantastic. But then when you read through like all the terms and the small print, you realize you also have to be a Canadian citizen in order to obtain these jobs. And again, because of tax reasons. So maybe there's something that the government can do there. But I do think that collaboration across universities and international organizations would definitely eliminate some barriers.
That's interesting. Wow, we don't even need me anymore. Okay? So I'll just sit back and I'll take one up here and then we'll go to Diana.
Thanks, Jim, Justin here. Thank you, all of you, for bringing your perspectives into the room. It's a breath of fresh air for a conference like this, and much needed. I just wanted to say, I think in terms of, when we're thinking about working in the sector and all the different perspectives that you're bringing to the table from your own experiences, maybe the questions I think we're not asking, some of the right questions in terms of what is the transformation that we want to be seeing globally, and what is your role in contributing to that, as opposed to trying to get you to join, the sector that may or may not be the right fit. I think the sector is doing important work, but I think there's a lot of people doing important work in a lot of different sectors, and making a contribution. So I don't know, I would just be interested to hear your perspectives in terms of where do you think, where do you see yourself making a contribution, or where do you think, others of your peers in cohort see an opportunity to make a contribution?
I think that just brought back question 4.
Yeah.
Why don't you take it?
Well, I think like from my viewpoint and kind of where I'm kind of at in my career and what I think would be helpful to get kind of some of my peers who might be interested in entering the field is to create positions and like real actual full-time employment positions. None of these volunteers or these term limited sort of contracts where you get a stipend for your full-time work. Like really create these if it is within your organization's budgets, full-time positions that are specifically earmarked and aimed towards recruiting fresh grads and young professionals, right? I think it is unfortunate when let's say, if I as a young professional, I'm trying to get these entry-level or junior-level positions, but I'm needing to compete with people with 10, 15 years of experience on me, right? Like that I think is one very key barrier to ensuring that we have kind of this broad diversity of ages and voices kind of reflected in the industry as full-time staff. And that would be probably the first thing I would say.
Anybody else want to take it?
You can go ahead. No, go. I guess I can go. So Jim mentioned that this is related to question 4. We had talked about, this question about is the development field being left behind, and how can we transform it, or how is it transforming, which answers your question, which I think that the international development field is always changing. And for me, in my studying of the international development field, I would say that the 1960s was like the first decade of development. And that's when, you can kind of pinpoint a start. The development then is extremely different from the development now. And I think that we've moved from a really paternalistic, colonial kind of form of development to a more grassroots intersectional development, which I think is really important. And I see that's going to keep shifting. I'm sure that there's a lot of practices that we have today that 5 years from now won't be accepted, or we will look at it as, that was a bad call. I'm thinking, for instance, even just 5 to 10 years ago, like we call it the pornography of poverty, going into communities and recording, really sad children, malnourished, and then posting online and thinking, oh, we're going to make so much money, we're going to raise money for them, it's so beneficial. Now we know probably shouldn't do that. So I think that really just evolving and adapting and listening to marginalized voices is really important. And I think that media literacy is also contributing to this. There used to be a barrier in which, we didn't really know what was happening abroad. And now we have Instagram at the tip of our fingertips. We have Facebook, TikTok, everything, and we can really see what's going on in the world. And I think that that's definitely contributing to the transformation of the development field.
That's great.
And I think just to add, I think international development in theory is that none of our jobs are actually supposed to exist after a while. So I think in terms of transformation, I think what I would personally like to see is like, what are we doing to remove that dependency on this international system to because the way the international development field currently works is that, well, we need to keep pushing money into these countries, we need to keep pushing initiatives. What are we doing to ensure sustainability? Not sustainability of projects, but without the projects, once we remove that development infrastructure, because you would think in theory that our goal is they're eventually developed and we don't need all these interventionist initiatives. So I think that's more of a shift we need to do about the kind of programs that we have, the way we're approaching these programs. Are we putting steps in place to make sure that if this program is gone in a couple of years, this community can still do well? And that goes a lot with engaging with the actual community there, not just putting ideas that we think are best. And it also comes with training and the local capacity that's already there. We have all this knowledge. There's so many international development scholars that are emerging from here, and also have to take into consideration that are also emerging from developing worlds. So how are we making sure that we are listening to the ideas that they have, which are probably a lot more culturally appropriate to the region that they're in as well too, and make sure that we're removing that dependency on the system as a whole.
Thanks. Okay.
Maybe in terms of, and I think you really raised a very, and I say revolutionary sort of question. Anyway, I come from a country where most of the revolutionary sort of language is actually very often used. But what I would say that I think for us to be able to really talk about, to achieve that transformation that you're talking about, I think aspect of investment in youth organizing or youth sort of, we just actually need to be intentional when it comes to, programming around, meaningful youth, sort of youth, engagement, especially in spaces. I would say that we need to also interrogate aspects of like mentorship, because there may not be opportunities. Just imagine like you have many allies like myself planted, in different sort of spaces, and are provided with opportunities, the right skills and training. Definitely they will actually impact communities where they actually, live and work. The other aspect which I really find very important is to kind of, not only just looking at youth as maybe mere participants, just like I was talking about, but just really bring them actually, investing in even the organizations that they have founded. And I think, and even in my current role right now, I think that's what sort of direction that we're not just seeing youth as participants, we're seeing and believing in youth as drivers of this change. We're investing in the organizations. We are trying to sort of eliminate certain sort of donor, barriers. Like for example, when it comes, competing for available resources, you find that established organizations are not going to sort of compete with small entities. And I think we need to sort of be intentional if we are going to sort of create that, transformational change that we're talking about. And maybe the other thing is also, like best understanding the situation, because most times, unlike statistics designs or in these developed countries, but majority of our populations, especially on the African continent, almost over 70% are youth. But you find that a very small segment of the population are the ones that are in control. I talked earlier on about the spaces of, where we need to shift mindset, where we need to shift the way of doing things technologically. You find that most of these spaces that even if you go to a ministry that is maybe ICT innovation, but someone who's actually occupying maybe a position of influence is an 80-year-old. Just imagine what kind of transformation is going to, especially in this sort of changing, changing sort of world. So I think we just need to be intentional when it comes to programming around some of these issues.
That's really interesting. We've got to move on. But I think this is a really interesting discussion. And what I'm hearing in some ways is a bit of a tension between a desire to think differently, to act in the world, to change the world, but also a need to have a career, to generate an income, right? And I reflect on my own path in some ways, that I spent the first 13 to 15 years of my career wandering around Southeast Asia and South Asia, going from volunteer internship to one to another, and knowing though that it was all going to work out, right? And I think the technical term for that is privilege, right? Being able to sort of do what I wanted, but not necessarily thinking that there were going to be consequences. And what I hear from you, but I also hear from a lot of young people that I work with, that's not necessarily a viable path for a lot of young people anymore. And I think it's important for us as those that are gatekeepers to be able to hear that as well. So Diana, you had a quick question, I think.
No, yeah, just a quick reflection, and using Kenya as an example. So volunteering hasn't been, and maybe right now is probably when it's getting cheap, it hasn't been structured or well established. So if I was to say that I'm volunteering for an organization, the assumption is that I cannot get a job. So you can already see that in itself is a deterrent for a lot of people to get into development. And then also, anyone who's in international development are most likely from the global south, or if they're Kenyans, they are potentially older and or from a higher socioeconomic background. So again, there's some sort of class that is attached to it. And then also, if you think of the university sector or the high schools where they have exchange programs, most likely a private school. If not a private school, it's a public school whereby you have to pay extra for your child to attend that. So again, this is kind of a manufacturer. And so you find that as much as you would want to do it, it's not structured. There's no kind of path to do it. And for those who have the path, already they're being seen as privileged. So that again shifts that whole process. So and again, I think as you mentioned, for a lot of people, if you are in international development, the first question you ask is, what did you study to get here? Because there's an assumption that you can't just be a volunteer in international development. You have to either study something related to that. But if you look at the context of Canada, you can be an engineer and go into volunteer and go into development.
but that doesn't translate. And then a lot of people see development more so as charity. And so if I can't make money, why am I going to be here? So again, so those harmful kind of attitudes really deter young people from kind of volunteering, because they do want to get out of college and be able to make money. And so if they're not able to do that, that deters them. And so even organizations in Kenya don't necessarily support kind of national or local volunteers, and you'll find that a lot of people who volunteer do come from other countries. So again, just kind of trying to structure that process, and for young people to know that those could be avenues, opportunities, I think will take a little bit of time, because they do not see themselves in that kind of larger picture, but at the same time, they don't see how they're able to make kind of meet their livelihood, because no other people or young people are part of that process. What they see are much older people or people who are very different from them. So there's not connection of where they are and where they want to be.
So Diana, you have given me the best segue possible into the next question. Michael, did you have your hand up quickly? Are you sure?
I have to respond to you.
I'll look for a third time. You mentioned education and career paths, right? So we are here at a university. We've got 3 of the 4 panelists are current university students. So we did want to ask a question around how your existing programs in international affairs and international development prepare you for your career paths, whether or not there's something missing in that. And I think we've got a couple of profs in the room who will be listening. Yes, Betty's listening intently. Maybe we could start with Valentina.
Sure. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think that being at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs is a very unique experience in which I'm being exposed to so many, every week I'm meeting a new diplomat, which has been really, really incredible. And I think that but it's very unique, and I think that not every student has these opportunities. So just speaking from a place of, being at the Norman Patterson School, being in international affairs, being in Ottawa, having an undergrad in international development, I'm very fortunate. And I think that truly just networking has been a fantastic way to, eliminate barriers and to get to know people and to attain positions in this field. And being extroverted, it's hard, it's really hard to be an introvert in kind of like a networking kind of environment. So being extroverted, and also I cannot speak more highly of the co-op program. Since from a very young age, from my undergrad, I was very fortunate to have the co-op program, and I got my first step in government, and I'm very grateful for that, because now I've had a ton of experience since then. So, I think that more universities should definitely push for having co-op programs and paid co-op programs too, because I feel like there's also a big difference. Myself, I'm in international development. I'm very lucky I get to work in government, but then I'm looking at my friends in social work. And for instance, social work can also be an international field, but my friends in social work do unpaid internships. So, really promoting the paid aspect of a co-op program is really important.
Great, co-op. Anything else? We'll take volunteers. Who would like to follow up?
One of them can go first.
Ali, why don't we go Ali, Genya, Emmett?
Yes. Sure. I think for me, the aspect of preparation, especially education, is very, very, very important. Education plays a very important role in, especially in bringing in shaping people's character, leadership, and everything. For me, I would maybe just reflect largely on, and when I look at, for example, opportunities for engagement around education, many of my colleagues have also talked, and David talked about, the opportunities that even the little time I've been in Canada, you see that there are these intentional sort of programs to prepare, young people for, the future. But you find that in most times, and especially now in Africa, and especially Uganda, where I've lived all this time, that opportunities such as those, especially when it comes to education, there's a great mismatch between the kind of information that is given to you while in school and what actually you find in actual, organizational setting. So you find that there are so many graduates that can't even write a cover letter, for example, that can't even put together, a resume, to apply for a job, or even to express and confidently maybe speak in front of a panel. So that's why the aspect of training is very, very important. And again, I will say that I count myself lucky because at a very young age, I had the opportunity of, being sort of prepared beyond what the education system could actually offer me. Through, mentorship, through, purpose sort of, training and capacity building. And for me, what I can say that it's only through education that we can actually achieve, the transformation that we're talking about.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else want to take that?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad in political science and international relations, and I can very confidently say that I learned a lot of the theory, but none of the practice in doing that. So as soon as I graduated, University of Calgary, great school. Still a great school.
University of Calgary, all theory.
Still a great school, but as soon as I graduated, I started working for an INGO, and I was working for like 2 months, and they're like, okay, you're ready, go into the field. And I got to go into the field, went to South Africa, and literally felt like a fish out of water. Just was super unprepared. I knew everything like in theory of like what I was supposed to do, but like none of that cultural sensitivity training whatsoever, none of the like mental capacity training of like how much it's gonna take, like the tools, all those things. So, I was like, let me just do a master's. So I skirted out of it, and I'm doing my master's now. So I think now I'm definitely seeing more of the practice elements. I see as Teddy is staring right at me. But yeah, so we were seeing a lot more of the practice elements too. And I think also like that training aspect of like, what does it actually look like to be in the field is something that I feel like was not discussed at all during my undergrad. And especially in a field of development where it's like, once you're in the field, you very much see that these are just Band-Aid solutions to like huge issues. And that like, as a young person, that's like so disappointing. You're like, I'm so ready. Like I went to school for this, like what's going on? Like, why isn't this working? So I think in terms of like what gaps is there, I think we definitely need to do a lot more of like the societal aspects, I would say, or the like psychological aspects of being ready for like trying to do international development work of like, you're in it for the long haul. Like I think as young people, we expect change like that, and that's something that is not gonna happen. So I think being able to be prepared to like, talk to community members on the ground is something that I would have appreciated more. And I think definitely a lot more training of like, before you go in the field, there's a lot of things to expect. So yeah, I think it's my master's is doing a great job of that.
Can I throw in a bit of an audible here? So
Yeah.
I'd like to riff on that a bit, and here's one of the others wants to reflect on this. Wouldn't mind hearing Teddy's thoughts on this as well. So just this morning, I was reading a piece in Foreign Policy. I forget who wrote it. He's a very smart dean of a university somewhere, talking about the genesis of international affairs programs and policy programs. And the short form was that most of these programs started in the United States after World War II. I think that NPSIA is a good example of the outgrowth of these programs into Canada, and that most were based on some required coursework in politics, some required coursework in economics, maybe a bit of sociology, if you have to, some management. But at the base, there is an assumption that through teaching case studies, through teaching theory, that we can understand how change happened in the past, and through understanding that we can make good decisions in the future. And the undercurrent of the articles, maybe that doesn't work anymore. And when we were talking this morning in the earlier sessions, we were talking about the climate crisis. We were talking about the triple crisis. We were talking about humanitarian crisis. And sometimes we get the feeling that these models, these cases, these ways that we're educated now are not necessarily preparing us to think about the challenges of the future. Now, I haven't prepped any of you with that question, so it's very unfair, but I'd be keen to hear your reflection on it.
Yeah, well, I guess just get started on that. I've been kind of in the international development space formally for just over a year, and I can say I have never been once asked to write a 20-page academic paper on ethnic nation building in Central Eurasia. So, I mean, there's obviously some disconnects there. Would I have still enrolled at Carleton University? I think I would have. Would I have been pursuing the same master's degree? Likely yes, and certainly it was actually through being kind of in this space, as Valentina did describe, that I was first exposed to the initial job opportunity that kind of led me down the path that I'm heading down now, which I would not have been able to access if I had, let's say, stayed in industry or stayed in some other sort of sector or had not decided to go back to school. So that's one factor. Also ripping off of some of the comments you made earlier, so the Treasury Board just actually released or announced their new sort of rates of pay for people working at Global Affairs and ISET, et cetera. So an EC2 now working for Global Affairs, so EC2s are essentially, right, they're recent fresh grads straight out of their master's degrees that are kind of in the sort of junior entry-level positions. They're making now $67,000 a year. I'm unsure if there are any sort of international NGOs today with entry-level positions or entry-level jobs or even junior level with 2 to 5 years experience that are able to have that in their budget line to compensate people up to that level, right? So if, let's say I was a young grad, right, that was trying to make a decision, for me, it was an easy choice going to the Parliamentary Centre and soon, and will be at the Dignity Network Canada as well, just because of how strongly I feel connected with the mission and wanting to do that sort of work. But everyone's different, right? And if you're wanting to be attracting top talent, right? If we're not able to be attracting entry-level positions or creating those positions at 67,000, or at least having some sort of trade-off, right? Like if you're not making at that same level a similar rate of pay, if you're going into an international NGO, then what else are you going to get? Like that's a big question. Reflecting back on kind of the notion of the training that would have been most specific and most helpful to me kind of in my current position, I'm sure all of us here work with some form of like projects or program management. I would say perhaps getting that formal project management certification or project management experience, that hands-on type experience. I know there's various sort of certificate programs and such that you can kind of access online. Most people that I have noticed, especially when you get to that 5-10 years down the road, you essentially just acquire all of those skills from doing. But if you can't get your foot in the door to start doing that work in the first place, how else are you going to get that sort of project management or program management type experience? Like at least there are kind of some of those programs out there, but it really does start becoming a chicken and the egg, right? Like you need 5 years of experience to get this job, but you can't get 5 years experience without the job, right? So maybe if we start taking another look at the way we approach the education in maybe taking a step back from academics or encouraging people that want to be pursuing like full-time, like career path worthy careers in international development to really beef up their project management and program management skills.
I think that there are a couple. I think University of Laval, I think, has a master's in development project management.
Yes.
I think it's one of the few that does. Valentina, any thoughts about higher education and how it should change?
I mean, you talked a little bit about case studies and how in your time in your undergrad you looked at a lot of case studies, and by looking at the past you can apply that to the future. But it's interesting because we were just having a meeting next as we had a meeting this week about branding and how we want to present ourselves, and we came to the realization that even though we're industry professionals and what we've learned we can apply to the future, every single case is different. So you really can't take a prepackaged solution and apply it to a new case study, especially in international development. You're working with so many different groups of people in so many different countries, and so I think that every single time you work on a new project, you have to be open and you have to be willing to learn and just willing to talk with the people who you are helping and really understand from them and really gain their perspective. So in terms of case studies, I think learning about the past is really important, but it cannot be a prepackaged solution for the future.
Interesting, yeah. Michael, you had a question earlier. Do you want to bring it up now?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. One of the words that has stuck out, we're just getting on project management, but one of the words that stuck out, one word in particular, mentorship earlier, and your ability and how you started early in your career in Uganda and over, and I imagine at the Parliamentary Centre as well, and when you worked in politics, you've got people who are willing to take on and start showing you how to do things. Maybe they didn't, you just had to learn as you were there. And I worked in politics too, and that's what it was, because all of a sudden I had no idea how to do it, and I figured it out. It lasted 3 years, and then I ran away from it. I am thinking about, and I'm resonating at there is a responsibility of organizations, and I hadn't thought of this until I came to this panel. I'd like to thank all of you for, even you, Jim, I'm even thanking you. Thank you, because first of all, there's an optimism and an energy that isn't always present when there are people of a different generation, and that's what so it's a responsibility, and I know, Jesse, it's nice to meet you, and I think from what I can see from the work that your small firm does, I know this happens at the Parliamentary Centre as well, Evo's sitting next to me, and certainly we try and do it in our small firm, but we have a responsibility as well then to actually be intentional about how we share and how we, I don't want to say teach, but more how we accompany, how we show young people who are trying to get into the sector. And if they stay in the sector or not, it doesn't matter, right? Because those are experiences that will serve them just as well in the different sectors that have an impact in international development. And so I don't know if there's someone here from CAIDP who sits on the board. I mean, I'm now a member of CAIDP, so I should have a say on this. And I think there's a strategy session on Friday.
I'm on the board, by the way.
There you go. And so there's an intentionality that you can, as a CAIDP member, you're going to say, right, we are going to be able to create a paid position for a young person. And I don't know if it has to come from NPSIA or elsewhere, but it's coming in, I don't know if it's going to be an EC2 level. The federal government being in Ottawa, what it does is it pushes up salaries across the board in a way that's not necessarily sustainable for other organizations. However, to create those sorts of opportunities in a very systematic way every year. Now, you're not going to create opportunities for every young person who's looking for a job in international development in Ottawa, but it is one way that as an association of organizations, that you can do it in a meaningful way every year. There's 10, there's 15, there's 20 positions available. I don't know how many hours a week. It's part-time. You're full-time students, so I mean, it's going to be hard to book another 40 hours on top of all the other cool stuff. Anyway, so it's just thinking intentionally about how this association itself creates those sorts of opportunities. And with a very explicit mandate, or it's not just I'm going to hire someone who's going to come and, no, you actually have a job to start, as you were describing. It's not 2 months and you're going to send you off somewhere. No, you're actually going to start learning you're going to be exposed to the nuts and bolts of what this work is. And that's some of the really strange nomenclature around results-based management, all of the GE3, C1 or 2, whatever it is at GAC. I'm looking at Heather who works at GAC, right? But it's stuff that if you're working in Canada and you want to work in this sector, it's stuff that you kind of have to become familiar with. Language. So sorry, I'm just putting an idea out there for an association like CAIDP to try and address this. And it's all the members of CAIDP to say, yes, we're willing to do this. And yes, we have a role to play.
So I do think there's a strategy session tomorrow, so we can bring it up. So we've got 3, I don't know everybody's names, so if we've got 1, 2, 3, sort of as we go from middle to left.
Just building off of that idea a little bit, there's a responsibility, I think, for educational institutions as well to offer these opportunities to students in untraditional ways, or ways we don't typically think of, because there's been mention of co-ops, internships. That takes a lot of time, and sometimes isn't always paid as well as that, like as it's been mentioned. So looking at different opportunities, not only for those that are in the traditional programs that lead to this type of work, but in the untraditional programs for institutions such as colleges and universities to partner with other organizations working on international cooperation projects, or those that are already working on international cooperation projects. How can we make these opportunities for students that have less barriers, whether that's for co-curriculars or even course-based projects, and where they're building those project management skills through the courses they're taking.
Very good.
It's such a nice segue to what I wanted to share. I didn't expect it, but I wanted to share a reflection and also ask you guys a question, just how things are these days. But when I started my career, my degree, which was actually a Carleton-based degree,
Same as mine.
had as part of its curriculum an internship. So you actually have to do it to complete the academic program. And the program will bring to you the opportunities and you apply to it. So, and then that's how I started my job. So it wasn't me finishing school wondering what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an intern somewhere, hope they'll hire me. But actually I had to do it as part of my academic degree. So I could have, if I wanted, had the choice. Well, I don't like that, but well, I've completed my master's, so here I'll do something else. But I don't know how many degrees are actually doing that, and how substantial it is. Whether a 1-month internship, 2-month internship can be something that's going to take you over, I would say, a year-long experience, which is when you really will start learning the ropes of the job. Because they're very different from what you do at school. They have no illusions there. They wanted the job is a different world, and that's probably not going to change.
Over here.
Thanks. Hi, thank you so much for such an energizing and inspirational panel. I'm Janet Longmore, and I'm with Dot. So, Hallie, thank you as always, you know. There's two things, and I have a question. One is, just listening to this, it really occurs to me that maybe it's time for a name change, international development, right? You know, to something else that really speaks to locally led development and the way in which those of us in Canada work in partnership and collaboration. And maybe there's another way where the sector itself collaborates with the social innovation sector, you know, the social enterprise sector, where so much is going on that overlaps, and so those opportunities are there. And I think each of you have touched on that in some way, you know, in your comments. But the question I have is if you could honestly say or give examples of when in your engagement you have felt fully trusted by those who are engaging you. We have learned so much over 20 plus years on that. And having to be the advocate for young people and to trust over and over and over and over again. And so I just would love to hear your experiences in that space.
That is a great question. Emmett, do you want to take it?
Yeah, well, also building off of that question and also referencing Ivo's question regarding internships, I would say in my current role, the most challenging, but also the most rewarding and feeling trusted kind of aspect of my position is managing the hiring process for part-time student project assistants who are kind of entering and trying to get their foot in the door. I think that was actually the same way that I entered the same organization. They are part-time positions. They're 20, 30 hours a week. They're paid. I think Katie's actually sitting right there. She's somebody that we were very, very fortunate to be able to hire. And being a young person able to be really leading the charge, working in collaboration with my supervisor and with other senior management at the center to really synthesize and distill what exactly we want with young people, knowing the lingo and the specific sort of terms that we need and the specific sort of things that I'm kind of looking for in who I would believe would be successful. I think that itself would be kind of maybe sort of a highlight of my current experience. But at the same time, when we're talking about going through that recruitment process, it's incredibly difficult. I've gone through essentially leading 2 cycles of this. So in August, we had an open call to fill 1 position. And so we got about 40 applicants for that 1 position, of which 2/3 would have been qualified and in my view would have been capable of completing the work. And so when we kind of got to the shortlist level, my first time kind of doing this, it was really, really almost luck and chance and splitting hairs when you're trying to distinguish between applicants, just with the extremely high degree of competitiveness for a paid position, which really does not come up in international development. We did that process again in this coming January, or this past January, and we had about 50 applicants for 1 position. And just the level of applicants was just so strong, and kind of trying to fit in some of the needs for our programming. We actually even had to pull some funding and change some of the items in our budget line for the project so that we would be able to hire 2 assistants. It was just really, I would say, even though yes, it was a really good experience. It really highlights, I think, very much the crux of the challenge it is for young people like myself who are trying to get their foot in the door and trying to kind of delineate that career path they want in this field.
Great, thanks, Emmett. Does anybody else want to take that? Some time when you really felt trusted.
I think, Janet, that's a great question. And actually, maybe just to say that Janet is one of those inspirational individuals I've actually looked up to. And it's only today that actually I saw her. I only met her just a flash, and that was in 2014 in Uganda, and I was very delighted. I couldn't hold my happiness when I actually saw her. Of course, I've been just reading about her, but maybe just to address what you actually asked, Janet. I think And I'll give maybe in my, my line of work, especially in Uganda, and this I bring it in an aspect of, leading and managing a youth organization. There are those moments that I really felt, part, of the process, and I felt that, we're actually working together. And these are moments like, donors, sort of actually, even before introducing a project, they could sort of sit with us and, ask these so many questions, will this sort of intervention actually work? And of course, getting all that feedback, and of course, the way it's designed, it's not even like pointing towards maybe future sort of collaboration or something leading to that. And then, of course, a couple of, maybe months down the road, they say, can we sit together and design something together and work together? But even beyond you creating those interventions, they could actually give us, the opportunity to say, can you design what you feel is actually feasible within your operating context? Trust me, and this is something that actually I felt, especially even delivering on this project, you really feel that you're trusted. But even when it comes to, like replicating or, sort of, rolling out this sort of program, you feel that even those that are giving you the resources, they trust you. Yeah. Even when you're proposing maybe, budget shifts, they actually, they know that you're actually, you are the experts on ground. Even when you actually do it, delivering, you really feel, and I think, and these are some of the things that I was talking about, actually being intentional when programming, that you really have to really, and I think, my brother, I didn't get your name. Michael. Yeah, you talked about, like that being intentional. I know it's very, very expensive, and sometimes that's why most program implementers normally wants to use a quick fix, without really investing. Because when you actually talk about, like, for example, consulting before engagement, co-designing, sitting, all these processes actually take a lot of resources to invest. So it requires your patience. It requires you to invest heavily through your pockets to be able to say, to achieve that desired sort of change. So for me, there are those moments, Janet, that I've actually really felt, and even like, contributing programs, you really feel that. And even interesting when let's say those that are seeing your work literally it resonates with that sort of confidence that exudes within you into the outside.
Great, thank you. We are at time, but I'd like to give the panelists one last opportunity to offer a couple of thoughts. Remembering that we have colleagues from Global Affairs Canada joining us today and tomorrow, and we'll be listening intently to voices from this community. So I hope that the community will ask, yes, how much are you spending on aid and how can we get more of it? But hopefully also we'll have some questions that maybe we could pose on behalf of the panelists in terms of what policymakers need to think about and what they should do. So if we could take 30 seconds each, then we'll wrap up.
Sorry, you want a question for policymakers?
Yeah, what can policymakers do? That could be anything.
You go ahead first.
Okay. I don't necessarily have a question, but rather like just a thought. I know there's a lot of youth, advocating for specific issues and feeling like their voices are silenced. So I know I've been working specifically on a file for what's happening in Gaza, and a lot of people aren't privileged enough to speak as openly about it. So I think, for policymakers and people that are in places of power, what are they doing to make sure that youth know that, these perspectives are appreciated and also are going to be listened to if they do want to work for organizations like this, and don't have to feel should I speak up about something I'm passionate about, or should I try and secure a career? Because that is a very unfortunate decision that people are making right now.
Sorry, I should clarify, not a question to policymakers, but more of a call to action to policymakers.
Yes, well, I'd say the call to action I'd like to probably pose is to find new ways and find pathways to ensure that commitments outlined in ministerial mandate letters as released in 2015 2019, and 2021, we've been beating the drum again, time and time again. Ensure that the departments that report to those ministers that have a very, could not be more clearly outlined mandate, ensure that those departments are passing policies and creating programs to ensure that those commitments are being met.
For me, I think, for me to the policymakers, I would actually say they need to actually sit down with the youth themselves to sort of design interventions, especially that really have a bearing on their lives. Because it's only through consultation, through co-designing these interventions with the youth at the center of driving those conversations, is when actually we can actually achieve the desired sort of outcome from whatever that is actually being presented. So if we ignored from those processes, we will actually shy away, we shall shun from actually participating, however good those programs will be. It's only actually when we are actually brought on board. And I think one thing that maybe to the youth generally, and there's this sort of slogan that we normally say that nothing for the youth without the youth. So it has to be at that at that point, really.
Thank you, Valerie. Last word?
I would say that if I could give any piece of advice, it's create spaces for youth and cater them to youth. You can't expect youth to want to come out to a town hall, where everybody's extremely dressed up, and it's extremely intimidating, especially for those youth that are not involved in international development. So cater to youth, plan a pub night with local representatives, chat with them, a pizza night. I feel like it's really important to cater to youth in that way. I promise you, free food will always get youth to your events, just noting that. And I think to close off, I wanted to mention one time that I've felt trusted. I want to say it right here, right now. It's an honor to be here in a room with international development professionals, and the fact that you are all here listening to our opinions and that you want our advice, I think that's incredible. So thank you for being here, and it's an honor to be here.
That's a great way to wrap things up. So, I don't know about everybody else.